While every module created for Drupal will be different, there are certain parts of Drupal that most modules will need to interact with. In this video, we're going to learn about the MVC philosophy, as well as how Drupal utilizes controllers and routing to ensure output from your module is served up to a site visitor when needed. Drupal uses an MVC design pattern similar but not identical to Symfony's MVC architecture. MVC stands for Model, View, Controller. As you can see on the screen, it's a pattern of programming that separates business logic from display logic. Model handles the business logic, View handles the display logic, and the controller coordinates communication between the two. The pattern makes it easier to maintain or change the code later on because you don't have to worry about accidentally altering, say, how a result is displayed if all you need to do is tweak the business logic code. There's a lot of discussion in the programming community about what MVC is or exactly what the ideal setup would be. If you're interested, you can look at the link on the screen. So you're probably already aware of how our simple static HTML page treats a request for a URL. If you go to example.com/blog/blog1.html on a static website, you'll have a root folder representing the example.com, which is called something like public_HTML, www, or www.root. Within that folder, you'll have another folder called blog, and within that folder, you'll have a file called blog1.html. Basically, for each directory in the URL, there's a corresponding folder in the file system of your web host, and for every page, a corresponding HTML file. With a CMS like Drupal, you abandon that one-to-one relationship. Instead, as presented in a previous lesson, the path Drupal is given by the HTTP request is routed by Drupal's front controller within index.php to the PHP controller file or form specified for the path a site visitor is requesting. And we're going to actually experiment with that in our first module. Once a request is routed by the index.php front controller to your module's controller file, your controller returns the response, typically some sort of render array, that'll be combined by Drupal with other information that makes up a page, so the visitor visiting the path you've specified will be shown the information or form that you need them to see for your module. So, what is a controller versus front controller? Well, there's a bit of jargon here that might be confusing to newcomers to Drupal. Drupal uses a front controller to bootstrap Drupal into a working state and handle incoming routing requests. This front controller is index.php. The types of controllers you'll be creating specifically for your module aren't the same as the front controller. Your controllers will be much smaller in scope and will be considered thin controllers. Well, those live in a controller file. A controller file contains the code needed to create a render array or a Symfony-style request object to send to Drupal so it can combine your module's results with all the other aspects of a Drupal page. So for instance, if we look at bookcontroller.php from the Drupal core's book module, you'll get an idea of what we're talking about. For further study, you can look at the link on the screen. There are naming controllers in Drupal. Controllers in Drupal should be named in the format module name controller.php and should live in the /src/controller folder in its project. And again, we'll be creating some of these. Drupal's PSR-4 class autoloader or composer won't be able to find your module's classes upon Drupal Bootstrap if you're not following the expected folder hierarchy. So it's important to name these folders correctly and make sure /controller is inside of /src. Basically, Drupal needs to know when to direct someone to a page for your module, which is what you specify in your module's routing file. Since your routing file is a YAML file, it uses Symfony's YAML syntax, where proper indentation and whitespace is meaningful and important. This is different from PHP, which doesn't care what your whitespace looks like. PHP will run regardless if everything else is correct. But YAML files, missing appropriate indentation or whitespace, will result in an error if you're missing even a single space. For more information on the routing keys and your routing.yaml files, take a look at the links on the screen.